Emily Carter stood at the gate of the military base with the morning sun warming her shoulders. She had been assigned to gate duty for the week, and while she treated it with seriousness, she could hear the whispers of the other recruits behind her back. To them, this was the least important job, a dull task meant for someone who did not belong in the main action. Some even called it punishment duty, though Emily never thought of it that way. She believed every assignment had value if one carried it with pride. Still, she could not ignore the laughter that sometimes floated her way when she adjusted her stance or when she saluted passing officers. Emily was new to the base. Fresh out of training, she was still adjusting to the rhythm of military life. She was younger than most of the soldiers around her, and her quiet, thoughtful nature made her an easy target for teasing. She was not the type to shout or brag, and she did not come from a long family line of decorated officers like some of the others. What she did have, however, was determination. She remembered her father's words every time she felt small. He had been a guard himself, though not in the military. He used to tell her, "Emily, you don't choose which doors you protect. But if someone trusts you with that door, then you stand by it like it's the most important place in the world." Those words became her compass as she faced her new role. The gate stretched out before her, a tall structure that separated the secure world inside the base from the restless world outside. Soldiers, families, and visitors passed through every day. To some, she was just another figure in uniform who checked papers and waved cars inside. But to Emily, each salute, each ID card, and each passing vehicle was an opportunity to show her discipline. She kept her boots polished, her hat aligned, and her eyes sharp. She wanted anyone looking at her to know that she respected the uniform she wore. Her fellow trainees, though, did not share her perspective. A few of them joked loudly when they walked by her station. "Still playing traffic cop, Carter," one said with a grin. Another laughed, "Careful, she might give you a parking ticket." They expected her to react, to argue, or at least to show that their words bothered her. But Emily stayed calm. She had learned in training that self-control was a form of strength. If she let her anger show, they would think she was weak. So, she simply tightened her grip on the clipboard she carried, lifted her chin, and went back to scanning the next vehicle. Though she tried not to let it get to her, the mocking stung. Emily had hoped to build friendships here, to find comrades she could rely on. Instead, she often felt like an outsider. During mealtimes, groups formed around the cafeteria tables, filled with laughter and stories of training drills or future dreams. Emily usually ate quietly at the end of a table, focusing on finishing her meal. She told herself she would earn their respect not with words but with actions. She would show them that she was not fragile or useless. She would prove it with the way she carried out her responsibilities. Her days on gate duty followed a strict routine. Early in the morning, she checked in, reported to her post, and stood tall as the first cars arrived. She had to balance alertness with politeness, making sure no one slipped through without clearance while also greeting families and visitors with respect. There were moments of stillness when she stood alone, the wind rustling through the trees by the gate, and there were moments of chaos when several vehicles arrived at once. Each time, Emily handled it steadily, reminding herself that this post mattered as much as any battlefield assignment. After all, without security at the gate, the entire base could be at risk. One afternoon, a small test came her way. A pair of soldiers decided to play a trick on her. They walked up to the gate with smirks on their faces, flashing what looked like ID cards. Emily studied the cards carefully, noticing that they were outdated. She did not let their mocking smiles distract her. Calmly but firmly, she told them the IDs were not valid and that they would need to return with proper clearance. For a moment, they laughed and tried to insist, but Emily stood her ground. She did not raise her voice or lose her composure. She simply repeated the protocol. Eventually, the soldiers shrugged and walked away, shaking their heads. Later, Emily overheard one of them admit to another, "She didn't crack. I thought she'd panic." Though they said it quietly, Emily caught the words, and they gave her a small spark of confidence. Over the days, Emily began to notice small signs that her attitude was being recognized, even if her peers did not say it aloud. Families driving in smiled at her warmth. Officers nodded at her crisp salutes. A visiting nurse once thanked her for being kind while checking her paperwork. These moments reassured Emily that she was not invisible. Someone was noticing, even if it was not the people who mocked her the loudest. Yet, she also knew that her biggest test was still to come. Rumors drifted through the base that a high-ranking visitor might be arriving soon. No one knew when or who, but the whispers spread like wildfire. Some said it might be a general, others hinted it could be someone even more respected. The excitement filled the air, and soldiers speculated about who would get to stand near the visitor. Emily listened but kept her thoughts to herself. She had no expectation of being noticed. Her job was to stay at her post, and that was what she would do, no matter who came. In the quiet moments at the gate, Emily often thought about her father again. She remembered how he once stood guard outside a small building in their town during a holiday. Many people thought it was unnecessary, but he did it anyway, never leaving his spot until the shift was over. "It's not about the size of the building," he had told her. "It's about the trust someone placed in you to protect it." That memory became a shield for her heart. Whenever doubt crept in, she remembered his firm stance, his steady gaze, and his belief that dignity came from doing your duty well. One cool evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily watched the golden light wash over the base. The gate seemed almost glowing in the sunset, and she felt a quiet sense of pride. She realized that though the others laughed, she was building something they could not see: discipline, resilience, and a reputation that might one day speak louder than their jokes. She did not know when that moment would come, but deep down, she believed it would. And so Emily continued her gate duty. Every salute, every ID check, every calm response to teasing added another layer to the unshakable character she was building. She did not know that her chance to prove herself in front of everyone would come sooner than she imagined. For now, she simply stood tall, guarding the gate that others called a joke, waiting for the day when they would see its true value. Emily's second week on gate duty began with the same quiet determination she had carried since the first day. By now, she had memorized the rhythm of the mornings: the way the first trucks rolled in just after sunrise, the way the light caught on the flag above the base, and the expressions of tired soldiers returning from long nights of work. She had trained her eyes to notice details quickly: a crooked ID card, a mismatched uniform piece, or even a nervous glance from someone walking past. What others saw as a dull post, she treated like a lesson in awareness. Every small interaction was a chance to sharpen her instincts. Still, the teasing from her peers did not stop. If anything, it had grown sharper. Some of the soldiers who thought they were stronger or braver found it amusing to stop at her gate and challenge her. They would roll their eyes when she asked for proper identification, or they would act surprised that she was actually taking the job seriously. "Relax, Carter," one of them said with a smirk, "do you really think anyone's going to attack us right here? This is just babysitting duty." Emily did not respond. She simply checked his card, handed it back, and waved him through. The soldier drove on, shaking his head, while his friend laughed beside him. But Emily refused to let their mockery shake her. She reminded herself that those words were not truth, only noise. Her father's lessons guided her like a compass. She kept her uniform neat, her salutes crisp, and her tone calm but firm. She told herself that one day, maybe not soon but eventually, people would understand why she never took her duty lightly. That understanding began to grow in small, quiet ways. A family arriving at the base stopped at her gate one morning. The mother looked stressed as she searched for her papers, and the young child in the back seat began to cry. Instead of rushing them, Emily spoke gently, asking if the mother needed a moment. She waited patiently until the woman found the documents, checked them carefully, and then bent slightly to smile at the child before waving them inside. The mother looked at her with relief and gratitude, whispering thank you before driving off. Moments like that filled Emily with quiet strength. It reminded her that she was not just checking IDs, she was dealing with people, and her respect mattered. However, not everyone saw it that way. Some of her peers grew annoyed that Emily never snapped under their jokes. They wanted to see her angry, to prove she did not belong. One afternoon, two trainees walked through the gate carrying boxes. They laughed as they pretended to stumble, dropping the boxes on purpose to block her path. "Oops, better check what's inside, guard," one of them joked. Emily stayed calm, bent down, and asked them politely but firmly to move along after she verified their clearance. They were surprised she did not argue, but instead held her ground with calm authority. As they picked up the boxes, she heard one whisper to the other, "She's not as easy to rattle as I thought." It was a small victory, but it encouraged her heart. Despite this, the label of gate girl stuck with her. Soldiers used it half jokingly, half dismissively, and it followed her in the cafeteria and the barracks. She pretended not to hear, but inside, she sometimes wondered if she would ever be seen as more than a trainee put on the simplest task. Late at night, when the base grew quiet, she would sit on her bunk and think of her father again. His words replayed in her mind, "Every post is important if you guard it with honor." She repeated them until they felt like armor against the doubts creeping in. Then came the day when everything seemed to shift. A rumor spread through the base that a highly ranked visitor might be arriving soon. The chatter filled the air like electricity. Some said it could be a general inspecting the base, others hinted at an officer from a special operations unit. The details were unclear, but one thing was certain, whoever it was, they commanded respect. Soldiers began polishing their boots, adjusting their uniforms, and speculating about how the visit would unfold. For most of them, it was an exciting possibility. For Emily, it was just another reason to stay sharp at her post. She did not know if the visitor would pass through her gate, but if they did, she would be ready. That afternoon, Emily's focus was tested again. A soldier approached the gate with an impatient stride. His tone was dismissive as he waved his ID in her face without stopping. Emily called out firmly, "Please hold, sir. I need to check it properly." The soldier frowned but stopped, clearly annoyed. Emily studied the card, noticing a small detail out of place. The expiration date had passed by 2 days. She pointed it out respectfully, asking him to have it renewed before returning. At first, the soldier looked frustrated, but then his expression softened as he realized she was right. "Good catch," he muttered, taking the card back. Emily saluted him as he left, and though he didn't say more, she felt his tone had shifted. For once, there was no mockery in his voice, only respect for her attentiveness. The sun was lowering in the sky when Emily began to sense the base's energy change. Vehicles lined up in preparation for the rumored arrival. The gate area was unusually busy, with more soldiers walking around than usual, and several officers standing nearby as if waiting for someone important. Emily tightened her gloves, straightened her hat, and prepared herself. She had no idea who was coming, but she felt the weight of the moment. The laughter, the doubts, the whispers, all of it faded in her mind. All she could think about was her duty. She would not let herself falter, no matter who arrived. A low hum of engines filled the air as a convoy of black vehicles appeared in the distance. The sound grew louder as they approached, and conversations around the gate hushed. Emily's heart quickened, but her stance remained steady. She lifted her clipboard, ready to follow every protocol she had memorized. The convoy slowed to a stop before the gate. Dust swirled around the tires, and the sun glinted off the dark windows. Soldiers nearby leaned in, curious, their eyes fixed on the vehicles. Emily stepped forward, her voice steady as she began the standard process. And then the doors opened. From the lead vehicle, a tall figure stepped out, his uniform sharp, his presence commanding. Emily recognized the insignia instantly. This was no ordinary visitor. The soldiers nearby gasped softly, their eyes widening. Standing before them was the SEAL commander, a man whose reputation traveled far beyond the base. He was known for his discipline, his skill, and his unwavering commitment to honor. Emily had only heard his name whispered in admiration during training, never imagining she would stand face to face with him at her gate. Her hands did not tremble. She saluted with precision, her voice clear as she greeted him according to protocol. The commander paused, his sharp eyes studying her. For a long second, the air seemed to still, and the soldiers who once laughed at Emily held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The moment the SEAL commander stepped out of the vehicle, the air around the gate shifted. It felt as if time slowed, and even the wind seemed to pause. Emily Carter's heart raced inside her chest, but her face remained calm and disciplined. She had trained herself to never show nerves, and this was the time when that training mattered most. Standing straight, she brought her hand to her forehead in a crisp salute, her eyes steady and respectful. The commander, a tall man with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, returned the salute with a measured nod. Around them, the soldiers who had mocked her earlier froze in place, their mouths slightly open as they watched the scene unfold. The commander's presence was commanding in every sense. His uniform carried the marks of decades of service, and the medals pinned to his chest were symbols of stories whispered about across military circles. Emily had heard of him during training, though she never thought she would ever meet him in person. He was not just a leader, he was a legend. Many considered him untouchable, the kind of officer who demanded excellence from everyone and gave respect only where it was earned. That was what made the way he paused in front of Emily so surprising. Emily cleared her throat gently and followed the protocol she had rehearsed countless times. She requested identification, her voice steady though her heart pounded. Some soldiers nearby shifted uncomfortably, certain she would embarrass herself by asking such a thing from a man of his rank. But the commander's expression did not darken. Instead, he reached calmly into his uniform pocket and handed her his documents without hesitation. Emily inspected them carefully, her eyes scanning every detail, exactly as she had been trained. She did not let his reputation distract her. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Every door you guard is important, no matter who stands before it." After a few seconds, she handed the documents back with a respectful nod and said, "All clear, sir. Welcome." Her voice did not waver, and her salute was sharp as ever. The commander studied her silently for a moment longer. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in thought, as though he was measuring something invisible. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he stepped closer and said in a voice low but strong, "You carry out your duty with pride. That is rare." His words carried across the hushed crowd like a wave, and Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. She did not respond, only bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement. The soldiers watching were stunned. These were the same people who had laughed when she was given gate duty, who had whispered that she was wasting her time standing at the gate like a statue. Now they stood frozen as the commander, the man they admired and feared, gave her recognition no one had expected. The commander's entourage moved to continue forward, but he lingered for another moment, turning his gaze back to Emily. "Never let anyone tell you your post is unimportant," he said clearly, making sure others heard. "The smallest post can hold the greatest weight when it is guarded with honor." With that, he saluted her once more before walking forward, leaving the soldiers stunned into silence. Emily felt a swell of pride inside her chest, but she kept her face composed. Her training had taught her to never let emotions show too strongly in uniform. Still, she could not deny the way her heart glowed at his words. For so long, She had stood quietly while others mocked her, holding on only to her father's advice. Now, in front of everyone, the most respected figure she had ever met had confirmed that she was right to take her duty seriously. When the vehicles moved on and the area began to clear, whispers broke out among the watching soldiers. "Did you hear that?" one said quietly. "He actually stopped for her." Another shook his head in disbelief. "The commander never does that. Never. I've seen people with higher ranks not get a second glance." Their words carried a mix of shock and admiration, and for once, not a trace of mockery was directed toward Emily. But Emily did not dwell on their reaction. She returned to her post as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She checked the next vehicle with the same steady focus, saluted with the same precision, and stood with the same discipline. Inside, though, she felt stronger than she ever had before. She knew this moment was not just about her. It was about the meaning of duty itself. Later that evening, when the sun began to set and her shift came to an end, Emily walked back toward the barracks. Along the way, she noticed soldiers looking at her differently. Some nodded respectfully, others avoided her gaze as if ashamed of the way they had treated her before. She did not return their stares with smugness or triumph. She simply carried herself with quiet dignity. That night, Emily lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She thought about how quickly everything had changed in just a few moments at the gate. For weeks, she had endured laughter and doubt. She had questioned herself in silence, wondering if she truly belonged. And then, with a few words, the commander had confirmed everything she had believed in her heart. She thought of her father again, and a small smile touched her lips. She wished he could have seen it. He would have been proud, not only of the recognition she received, but of the strength she had shown even when no one believed in her. The next day, the atmosphere around the base was different. News traveled fast, and word of what had happened at the gate spread like wildfire. Soldiers whispered about how the commander had personally stopped to salute a trainee. Some doubted at first, but those who witnessed it confirmed the story again and again. Emily's name was suddenly spoken with a new tone, no longer mockery, but curiosity and respect. Still, Emily did not change her behavior. She continued to approach her gate duty with the same seriousness, arriving early, keeping her uniform sharp, and treating every visitor with respect. When some soldiers tried to approach her with questions, asking what the commander had said, she only replied, "He reminded me that duty matters, no matter how small it looks." She offered no more than that, keeping the moment private in her heart. But deep inside, she knew something important had shifted. She was no longer just the gate girl. She had shown, not through arguments or bravado, but through her actions, that even the post considered least valuable could command honor when guarded with pride. The commander had seen it, and now others could not ignore it. For Emily, the experience did more than silence the mockery. It gave her a sense of belonging she had long craved. She realized she did not have to shout or prove herself loudly to earn respect. All she needed was to stay true to her duty, to believe in her own worth even when others doubted it. She knew challenges would come again, and mockery might never fully disappear. But she also knew she had found her strength. And once strength is discovered, it cannot be taken away. The day after the commander's unexpected recognition, Emily Carter noticed how the atmosphere at the base seemed to shift. Soldiers who had once laughed openly at her were quieter when passing her post. Some avoided her eyes, while others gave small nods of respect, though they never said the words out loud. The whispers had changed too. Where she had once heard mocking tones and jokes about traffic cop duty, she now caught snippets of admiration and surprise. "The commander actually stopped for her," someone murmured in the cafeteria line. "He saluted her back," another whispered. Emily heard these words but pretended not to notice. She did not want to live for their approval. What mattered most was that she had stayed true to her duty, and the commander's words had confirmed that she was right to do so. Still, not everyone accepted the change so easily. A few of the more arrogant trainees were unsettled by the idea that Emily, the one they had considered the weakest, had earned praise from the man they all looked up to. Their pride stung, and they tried to cover it with careless remarks. "He was just being polite," one said, though his voice lacked the confidence of his words. "It doesn't mean anything," another added, though even he avoided looking directly at her. Emily chose not to answer. She had learned that silence carried more strength than arguing. But while Emily tried to carry on as usual, something inside her had shifted. She felt stronger, steadier, more certain of her place. The commander's words echoed in her mind whenever doubt tried to creep in: "Never let anyone tell you your post is unimportant." Those words were like armor around her heart, reminding her that the value of her duty did not depend on the opinions of those around her. That week, the commander remained on base for meetings and inspections. His presence kept everyone on edge, as soldiers hurried to keep their uniforms perfect and their routines flawless. Emily noticed that the gate felt different when she stood there now. Every time a car approached, she carried herself with the quiet awareness that she might again be seen by the highest-ranking officer she had ever met. But she did not let that pressure overwhelm her. She simply did what she had always done: check carefully, salute with respect, and stand tall. Then came a moment that tested her composure more than ever. It was a late afternoon when the sun cast long shadows across the gate. Emily stood at her post, scanning documents as vehicles rolled through. Suddenly, she noticed movement at the corner of her eye. Several soldiers had gathered nearby, their attention focused on her. Among them were the very trainees who had mocked her most harshly. They were whispering and nudging each other, as though waiting for something. Emily realized quickly what it was. The commander's convoy was approaching again. Her heart quickened, but her face remained calm. The low rumble of engines filled the air as the black vehicles approached, sunlight flashing off their polished surfaces. Soldiers who had been idling nearby quickly straightened their stances, hoping to look sharp if the commander glanced their way. But Emily stood exactly as she always did: alert, respectful, unwavering. The vehicle slowed to a stop at the gate, and the air seemed to thicken with tension. Everyone around her knew what was coming. The door of the lead vehicle opened, and once again, the SEAL commander stepped out. His presence alone seemed to command silence. Emily's salute was immediate and crisp, her voice steady as she greeted him according to protocol. This time, the commander did something even more unexpected. Instead of simply handing her his documents and moving on, he stopped in front of her and turned to face the watching soldiers. His voice carried the weight of authority, deep and unwavering. "Do you know why I salute her?" he asked, his eyes scanning the crowd. No one answered. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant cry of a bird and the steady hum of engines. The commander continued, his tone sharp but calm. "Because she respects her duty. Because she understands that guarding a gate is not a joke, but a responsibility. Because she shows discipline when others show arrogance." His words struck like thunder, and the soldiers listening lowered their eyes in shame. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding, but she kept her face still. She had not expected him to defend her so openly, especially in front of the very people who had mocked her. The commander turned back to her, saluted her with the same crispness as before, and said, "You remind me why discipline matters." Then he moved on, his entourage following behind him, leaving behind a silence so deep it almost rang in the air. The soldiers who had once laughed at Emily were visibly shaken. Their smirks were gone, replaced by wide eyes and flushed cheeks. None dared to speak for a long moment. When they finally did, their voices were hushed. He stood for her," one whispered, disbelief thick in his tone. Another shook his head slowly. "We laughed at her, and the commander himself just gave her more respect than I've ever seen him give anyone else here." From that day on, things changed in a way Emily had never imagined. The same soldiers who once mocked her now treated her with quiet respect. Some saluted her when they passed, not out of obligation, but out of genuine acknowledgement. Others began to approach her, asking questions about how she stayed so calm, how she managed to carry herself with such composure. Emily never boasted. She simply repeated the words she lived by: every post matters if you guard it with honor. The change spread through the base like ripples in water. Younger recruits began to look at her differently, not as someone stuck on gate duty, but as an example of what it meant to carry out an assignment with pride. Even officers began to notice her presence more, nodding at her when they passed through. Emily found herself becoming a quiet symbol of something larger than herself, the idea that dignity did not come from rank or assignment, but from how one carried it. But Emily herself never let the recognition distract her. She continued to arrive early for her shifts, continued to check IDs with sharp eyes, and continued to stand tall at her post. She knew respect could be fleeting if she grew careless. The commander's words were not simply praise, they were a reminder of responsibility. If she wanted to keep the respect she had earned, she had to keep living by the same principles. That night, lying on her bunk, Emily reflected on what had happened. For weeks, she had been the subject of laughter. Then, in a single moment, everything had changed because she had refused to abandon her sense of duty. The commander had not praised her for being lucky or for being in the right place at the right time. He had recognized her for being consistent, for standing firm even when others tried to shake her. That realization filled her with a strength she had never felt before. She thought again of her father's words and realized that they had carried her through every trial. Stand by your post like it's the most important place in the world. She had done exactly that, and it had not only changed how others saw her but also how she saw herself. She was no longer the quiet trainee on the edge of the group. She was Emily Carter, the soldier who had shown that honor was not in the size of the post but in the heart of the one who guarded it. The days after the SEAL commander's powerful words at the gate felt different for Emily Carter. The air around the base seemed lighter, calmer, as though a weight had been lifted. Soldiers who once mocked her now carried themselves more carefully around her. Some nodded in respect when passing, while others gave her small, hesitant smiles. A few of the younger trainees even saluted her with extra sharpness, as if they wanted to follow the example she had set. Emily noticed all of this but did not allow herself to grow prideful. She reminded herself again and again that recognition was not the goal, honor and duty were. Her routine at the gate remained unchanged. She still woke before dawn, polished her boots until they shone, and checked her uniform twice before reporting to her post. She still stood tall as the morning sun rose over the base, scanning every vehicle and every ID with the same careful attention as before. If anything, she felt even more responsibility now, because she understood that people were watching her. She was no longer invisible. Her actions carried weight, and that weight could either inspire or disappoint. Emily noticed the difference most in the way people spoke near her. Before, she had often overheard mocking words whispered behind her back. Now, she caught quieter conversations. She takes it seriously, one soldier said softly to another. That's why the commander noticed her. Another replied, I guess gate duty isn't a joke after all. These words made Emily's heart warm, but she never let the satisfaction show on her face. She wanted to remain steady, unshaken by either mockery or praise. Her peers began to treat her differently outside the gate as well. In the cafeteria, where she had once sat alone, a few soldiers now offered her a seat at their table. Some asked her about her background, curious about what kept her so disciplined. Emily never gave long speeches. She simply said, my father taught me that every post matters. I just try to remember that. Those words seemed to stick with the others, just as they had guided her all along. But the true measure of her impact came when new recruits arrived at the base. Fresh, nervous faces stepped onto the grounds, unsure of themselves, just as Emily had been not long ago. She noticed how some of them looked at her when they first saw her at the gate. Whispers spread among them too, but this time they were not filled with laughter, they were filled with awe. "That's the one the commander stood for," one recruit whispered. "She's the reason they tell us to take every duty seriously." Emily heard these words but remained focused. She wanted them to see not just a story, but a living example of what it meant to honor the uniform. One afternoon, as Emily stood at her post, a young recruit approached nervously. His hands trembled slightly as he handed over his documents, and Emily noticed his voice falter when he spoke. She looked him in the eye and smiled gently, though her stance remained professional. "You're doing fine," she said quietly as she checked his ID. The recruit's shoulders relaxed, and a grateful look crossed his face. Emily waved him through, but inside she realized something important. She was no longer just guarding the gate. She was guiding others, showing them through her actions how to stand tall even when the world seemed ready to laugh at them. The SEAL commander eventually completed his stay at the base, but the memory of his actions lingered. Stories of his salute and his words spread far beyond the gate. Soldiers repeated them in the barracks, in the cafeteria, and even in letters home. Emily's name became linked with a lesson that echoed across the base: dignity and discipline matter, no matter where you stand. One evening, as Emily walked back from her shift, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She passed a group of trainees who had once laughed at her. This time, they did not mock her. Instead, one of them stepped forward awkwardly and said, "Carter, I just wanted to say, we were wrong." His voice carried genuine regret, and the others beside him nodded in agreement. Emily looked at them calmly, her face soft but composed. "You don't owe me an apology," she said gently. "Just remember, every post matters." The soldiers exchanged glances, realizing she had not only earned respect but also forgiveness in her heart. That moment stayed with them longer than any lecture could have. Emily's days continued with the same rhythm, but inside, she felt a transformation. She no longer doubted her place. She no longer questioned whether she belonged among the others. The commander's salute had been a turning point, but it was her consistency, her refusal to waver, that had truly changed everything. She carried herself with quiet confidence, not needing recognition, because she knew the truth of her worth. Weeks later, during a training exercise, one of the senior officers gathered the recruits together. His voice was stern as he addressed them. "Many of you think you are judged by how fast you run or how loud you shout. But discipline is measured in quieter ways too. Let me tell you about one of your fellow soldiers who stood at a gate and treated it like the most important post in the world. Because of her, the commander himself reminded us all what duty means." The officer's eyes swept the group, and though he did not name her directly, every head turned slightly toward Emily. She stood quietly in the crowd, her face calm, but inside she felt a surge of pride. She did not need her name spoken, the lesson itself was enough. That night, Emily sat alone for a while under the stars. The base was quiet, and the air carried a cool breeze. She thought about the journey she had taken, from the lonely days of laughter and mockery to the moment the commander had saluted her. She thought about how she had wanted so badly to prove herself, and how, in the end, all she had needed to do was stay true to her duty. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, as though speaking to her father, "I stood by the post, just like you said. And it mattered." In that quiet moment, Emily realized something deeper. Respect from others was valuable, but the greatest respect was the one she had gained for herself. She had proven to herself that she was strong enough, steady enough, and worthy enough to stand in uniform with pride. The laughter had faded, the doubts had vanished, and in their place stood a soldier who understood the true meaning of honor. From then on, whenever new recruits asked her advice, Emily gave the same answer: "Don't worry about the size of the post. Worry about the size of your heart when you guard it." Her words carried the weight of her experience, and they spread quietly through the base, becoming a lesson others repeated long after she spoke them. Emily Carter remained on gate duty for several more weeks before moving on to other assignments. But no matter where she was sent, the story of what had happened at that gate followed her. It was told not as a tale of luck, but as a story of resilience, discipline, and quiet strength. And though Emily herself never bragged about it, those who had seen it with their own eyes would never forget the day the SEAL commander stood for her.